Mixing with Mike mixing tip. Mixing with Vari compressors. Vari stands for variable mu, which is basically a technical term more or less for tube compression. Now, many compressors have tubes in the circuitry, but quite often they're part of the amplification circuitry, not necessarily part of the gain reduction circuitry. And that's where working with the true Vari compressor is different, where the actual compression is applied with the actual tube. Now, I'm not going to get into all the technical aspects of it, but there are reasons why you would select a Vari compressor over another compressor. So there's a couple of classic ones here. Probably the most famous of the Vari compressors is the Fairchild 670 and 660. And this is a universal audio emulation of that. And it's a pretty simple unit, primarily designed really for broadcast and also mastering for vinyl. The lateral and vertical controls are essentially controlling the lateral and vertical movement of the cutting lathe, and that's kind of where those things come in. So that is actually written in there on that, and an incredibly powerful compressor with just a ridiculous number of tubes outside of and transformers, and just incredibly rich and beautiful sounding. There's also another one which is far less known, and this is the U73, which was a very famous Vari mastering compressor built by Telefunken, and back in, I guess their compression technology, I think, goes back to the 40s and 50s, maybe back to the 30s actually, the earliest stuff that they were creating. Most of this stuff was done for broadcast, but there were adapted versions of this starting in the 60s up until the 80s. These were kind of big, and a lot of records were mastered through this very particular Vari compressor. So this was a German product, and almost entirely there, just in that. It's the U73B Vari, and it actually is somewhat connected in the Telefunken world if you're familiar with the V72 preamp. For mic preamps, which was pretty amazing, and so this one is quite cool as well. And on the modern side, probably one of the more popular ones is the Vari by Manley, and this limiter compressor is just stunning in terms of its Class A component, and where I think it stands apart in a way from some of the other ones is that in it being more of a modern design, I think you get a little bit more of a kind of high fidelity approach to it. It's not that the Fairchild is not high fidelity or that the U73 is not. They're rich and perhaps a little bit deeper sounding and maybe a little bit warmer on the top. And while there's a little bit of a sizzle there, it's a slightly different thing. So what you've noticed here in these things is that most of what I've shown you here has been primarily used either as a mix bus compressor or in the mastering stages. And part of this is because of the expense of them. They're quite expensive to build. They're not an easy thing to build and maintain. So from that perspective, it's not like studios were stacking them up and you didn't have consoles full of these things that you might have, like, for example, if you go back to the Neve 2254 limiter, where that would actually could be fitted right into the console. None of these were fit into console. These were all external rack unit type of things. And I'm not clear about the U73 because this fit into a rack that was very similar that also housed those V72 like power supply, same power supply that would power the V72 preamps. But they're all pretty amazing sounding. And so what I want to do is just kind of just show you what it's about. So quite often, when you get into these types of limiters, you can use them on almost anything. Part of the amazing thing about bringing this into the plug-in realm is that we can really feature a lot of these things on individual elements or individual instruments, and that kind of makes them very, very powerful components. So, for example, here, what I have a drum and percussion stem. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to drop this right onto my drum and percussion stem here, and let's just kind of And you could hear right away what this is doing to the sound, right? So this is the U73. Now, in the original unit, it actually had a high-pass filter which rolls off frequencies below 100 cycles. And certainly not something that you would want to use it on for this type of thing, or a mastering type of thing, but it might fit into certain types of music. Part of that high pass filter thing probably has something to do with the mastering for vinyl, which was a big component of it. But it's really rich, really deep on the low end, on the warmth. And without this filter, so what they did in this emulation is they eliminated that filter, or gave you the ability to bypass it. So when you're in compressor mode, you can do this, and you can feel like, just notice the depth, the sort of clarity or air on the top end, but the richness and the way that the low end focuses. This is going to be the primary thing. And what I'm really going to do is I'm just going to get it to just kind of pump here a little bit and kind of work this a little bit. And you can just really feel the power. Like, I keep pulling the output gain down, but what's interesting is that a lot of this, it's not about a gain match thing. It's more about, it's just like the what really opens up is the depth and imaging. And that's part of the real reason why you would use something like this. Now, here, let's just for comparison, and this is not to be necessarily designed as a shootout, because the Fairchild compressor can be used. This is probably one that in studio use, past some of its mastering use and then getting brought into studios, people would use it on the mix bus, but they would also use it on anything you wanted to sound huge, pretty much. So this could be vocals, right? So if you had a lead vocal, and you wanted it to sound really huge, this would be the thing that you would use for it. If there were a drum sound, if you could, mix all of your drums through it or something. But it wasn't the type of thing, like, these things were really expensive. So it's not as if, and there were only so many of them that were built. It was a limited run of them. It wasn't like there were thousands and thousands of them and it went on for years and years. So these things were really, they become really priceless. They're very difficult to get now, and also they're so old. Getting them in real pure working condition is really amazing. So here I'm just going to do a similar type of pump here with this. So now this is different, but it has a very similar characteristic, maybe not quite as open on the top end as what you get with the U73. It's always hard because every one of these units, part of one of the things I say about emulations and working with them is which one did you emulate? And I believe the Universal Audio one comes from Alan Side's personal one, or the one that his favorite unit, which was in Ocean Way Studios. And he was the owner of Ocean Way Studios, and so that's going to be a really amazing one. But they will all sound different. So if you call out, for example, the Waves version, right, their Puig child, that would be Jack Joseph Puig's Fairchild, which is also amazing, and but different, and will have a different character, and so there's something to that. Now, I want you to just for the sake of comparison, kind of do this up, and now we'll do like a similar thing, kind of going with the Veramu compressor, the Manley one, and just to kind of give you an idea of what's going on here, because I want you to really, if there's a thing I want you to sort of understand from this, is getting a bit of the character sound, right? There's like a signature sound to a Veramu limiter, especially very good ones. And there's a very specific reason why you don't see a lot of them, because they're not easy to make and to make sound good. So there are issues in the physical aspects of designing and making one of these that makes it a little bit more difficult to manufacture. So you'll see plenty of optical components, and you'll see, and not even a whole ton of those, and tons of VCA ones, and a lot of these things are a little bit easier to design overall. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about this, because what I want you to notice here, and I can do kind of a quick comparison between them. For this has a much more hi-fi type of thing in terms of the way that it handles high frequencies. It's not, there's a little bit more of an edge or a sizzle to the other ones, where this one has a little bit more air on it. All of them create a sense of depth and size. And this is why you select a Veramu compressor, why you work with it. Essentially, what I hear is that it images low frequencies really well. Pretty much all of these, and I'm not sure about the Manley, will have transformers, which also had some density and a harmonic distortion characteristic to the low mid-range. I know the Fairchild does for sure. I'm not totally clear about the other two. Then they have the tubes, and the tubes will give to me like a nice, rich, low end, like sub-frequency, but it will also add a sizzle as kind of part of a harmonic, like way, like a high-level sort of distortion that comes across kind of like, it's almost like a noise, but it comes across as an air. And what that does is, in working in the sound field, what a Veramu compressor should do, if you really listen, and I'm going to kind of A-B this again, it'll do two things. One, it will raise the height of your mix. So you'll get stuff will sound a little bit higher. Your lows will sound a little bit lower, right? So high's a little bit higher in terms of going up, physically up in the speakers. You'll hear things image, almost raise up in their imaging, and the low end sink a little bit in the speakers. It's such a powerful thing. And when you do that, what ends up happening is that the mid or the front back perspective starts to really open up. And if you now listen, and I'll just kind of go through randomly through some of these different things, you'll hear the same basic characteristic with all of them. Now, all limiters do not do this. This is really the powerful thing. Part of the front back thing is also this subtle pump. So I'm not like crushing it. You don't need to crush it to really kind of make it work. So let's have a listen now, keeping that in mind, thinking purely about up, down, front, back imaging quality. All right, so if you followed there, I was just kind of going through the Varimu Fairchild, the Manley, the Fairchild, and the U73B, and they all have a different characteristic. So you may find, for example, that for your particular session, that there is a warmth and, kind of a little bit more of a gritty, ballsy, low mid-range that seems to cut through a little bit more in the U73 than it does on the Fairchild or the Varimu. And for that reason, you may decide to put that on a bass or on a particular instrument. And when you kind of focus it in that way, be very conscious of why it is that you want to put it on there. Notice that. So as you're working through individual sounds, and this is kind of the primary lesson, with the focus being on the Varimu limiters and why you would choose them over, a bridge diode limiter, a VCA limiter, an optical limiter, whatever compressor limiter that you want to use, there's a reason why you pick it. So when you listen to the sound and you say, the low end seems kind of muddy, you want to put something on there that is not going to take away the image, but is going to make it image more solidly. And this is where something like this might come in. A Varimu limiter might work really, really well, especially with a lead vocal where maybe it sounds a little thin and a little bit digitally. This is something that will bring in a richness and a warmth that isn't there. It'll bring in some of that character. And when you start, thinking about using your vintage components from this perspective, then you will get more out of them. And so there are other videos that I have that talk about this in selecting the best vintage EQ, the best vintage compressor. You have to think about the components and what they give you. What tonal character do they give you, and how does that enhance relative to the other things? The thing that some people get caught up in, and then I'll wrap this up, is that sometimes they'll think, oh, this is a really good thing, I'm going to put it on everything. So if I like it on the drums, and I put it on the bass, and I put it on the vocal, and I put it on everything, and then you can actually reverse the effect. There's so much too much of a good thing. Sort of what you start to lose some of the contrast. Part of what will make this work really, really well is the fact that it may be only on one or two things in the mix, and then it makes those things really stand out and contrast some of the other elements. And you have to kind of be strategic in terms of the way that you decide that. But anyway, that's a little bit some tips here on mixing with Varimu compressors. That's Mixing with Mike, mixing tip of the week.